Welcome to the Digital Responsibility Podcast. There is a vibrant community around the world exploring how we drive forward digital innovation, products and services, and generally exploit technology progression for the sustained benefit of society and the planet. On this podcast, you will hear from me, Christopher Johnson, and Rob Price, two of the original founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility, as we speak to our guests to hear their stories and piece together what it means to be responsible in the digital age. If you'd like to learn more, take a look at the website, corporatedigitalresponsibility.net.
So after a summer break, welcome to episode 9 of season 4 of the Digital Responsibility Podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Hanna and Josh, and we're going to talk about bias in tech, AI, kind of machine learning, but I suspect we'll go into a number of areas. So Hanna, could we start with yourself and a bit of an introduction, and both in terms of you and your interest in this area, because I know it dates back to an academic background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the introduction, Rob. Thanks for having me here as well. So my name's Hanna Eseku. I come from a background before tech and before data science, working with a social enterprise and working in the public sector, supporting sort of marginalized communities sort of back into work, alongside supporting with social regeneration projects as well. So, helping sort of underdeveloped areas within the UK sort of receive the funding and, bring the community back together. And I guess it was more or less during COVID, it was sort of sparked my interest in tech, where you saw communities, being ostracized almost from being able to job search solely because they don't have access to the world of internet and things. And so, I came in and decided to do a master's in artificial intelligence and data science, just purely for the fact of just understanding how the world of data and tech and algorithm machine learning works, and then how that can be fed into, making sure everybody has equal access within sort of that industry and within that technology.
And of course, brilliant introduction in terms of the relevance from a CDR point of view, in terms of equal opportunity for everybody and equal access, very aligned with the principles of the manifesto. Josh, co-host for today in terms of the session, but perhaps kind of a bit of an introduction to yourself as well.
Cool. So my background is tech, in the sense of I studied computer science at uni, so I was very much into like coding, that kind of stuff. But then post-uni, I decided to go down more of a people-focused route. So none of my roles post-uni have been hard coding software, but they have been a lot more people-focused. And so my interest in today's topic came from a point of diversity and inclusion. Within our company, I help out a lot of the diversity and inclusion projects that we do. So it was a thing of when Black History Month came about, a thing of what can we do to talk about ethics and data and diversity. And so this podcast came about, and then here I am.
Excellent. So for everyone listening, Principle 2 of the manifesto talks about this firmly to quote, promote diversity and diverse thinking integrated into product and service design, avoiding tech and AI-driven bias. Now, the key thing there for me has always been integrated into product and service design, because it's not enough in my mind for an organisation to just be thinking about what it should be doing, but to bring that to life in the work that it does. So Hanna, perhaps we could start with you. And I mean, as Josh just said, just passed through Black History Month, and I'm conscious that some of the things that you've talked about as a Black woman, and kind of looking at how data can be interpreted and embedded bias. What's your first thoughts in terms of the area, both in terms of good practice, but where it goes wrong as well?
Yeah, I mean, so just taking it back to the work I've done. So from my master's in artificial artificial intelligence, data science. I started that at the wake of the George Floyd, and then the worldwide spread movement of Black Lives Matter, and then that shifted into focus to organizations and looking at the systemic racism. What can organizations do, or what are they doing to ensure this isn't something that is ongoing within the UK specifically? I mean, I can predominantly speak about the UK because this is where I work and live. And so one of my specific research dissertation topic was to actually look at how we can empower individuals, put the power back into the hands of individuals, so Black men, Black women, to actually understand how these algorithms are working and how we can maybe, contribute towards the widespread access of data. So one of the things when I was doing my research is, you need to have quite a large sample size in order for it to actually affect or have any impact on the results of the algorithm, and to ensure that there is sort of, to an extent, an unbiased nature with what the output is. And I really struggled to actually get sort of the data from people within my community. I mean, it was easy because I was a Black female, and so I was able to get responses from Black men, Black women, but then it was still quite short compared to the uptake I had from Caucasian women that wanted to take part in the research as well. So it's a two-pronged approach. I think from what I found, is like, there is the limited access to data. Are we putting ourselves out there enough? But then rightfully so, it leads down the whole trail of issues around privacy and skepticism predominantly within our community about, well, what's the data going to be used for? Where is it going? So there's a lot of questions around that, and I would just say there's two elements. Are we putting ourselves out there enough? Are we making sure that data is accessible? But then also, our companies, our organizations making that active effort to actually sort of get that data from specific communities. And then that can be, of course, from perhaps maybe having people in the design process that are of color, that are Black, that are female, that perhaps maybe understand that market more, that can sort of get the reach out that you need into those sort of communities and get the data that is requested.
The question then becomes, how do you know? I mean, how do you know almost how something has been produced and tested or trained as a product? I mean, when it goes wrong, and kind of been lots of high-profile cases of where it's clearly wrong. But how would you know, in terms of looking at the products or services that an organisation provides, as to whether they've been trained or tested in appropriate and diverse ways? Is there any research out there that you know of, or stories that you've heard that would suggest that insight?
Yes, certainly. So during my research, when we had a look at sort of the ethical side of algorithms, there was definitely research that came through by Joy Boluwami, I think I've said her surname correctly, from the MIT Research Institute. And her research was specific, and I'm sure you would have heard about this, a lot of people would have, was looking at facial recognitions and the algorithms and the bias within that. And so I think, fortunate enough, I think the data or the algorithm was open source. So there was access within that community to be able to have a look at that algorithm and be able to break that down and have a look at the data and see, actually, there isn't simply enough data in like Black faces, just to put it out there like that, for an algorithm to be able to then train itself on sort of being able to recognize different faces from a Black community or a dark-skinned, let's say, individuals. So I think you can quite quickly understand where there is a bias, or perhaps maybe where something has gone wrong, when you look at what the data is. I think every data science always says what you put in is what you get out. If you put rubbish data in, you get a rubbish output, don't you? And so quickly we find that as individuals, we then perhaps maybe see the output of it, whereby we're going to, I don't know, soap dispenser. You've heard that or seen that quite widespread, where we're going to a soap dispenser and, it's probably not recognizing dark skin, for example, and that's us understanding the output. Whereas if there was individuals who perhaps could relate to the problem, or who in the design process, they would have been able to spot that a lot sooner than a consumer using the output, if that makes sense, Rob.
But it's such a great example in the sense that of the soap dispenser, because a lot of the high-profile cases are where it has a direct, obvious. Kind of going through an airport, for example, it's a direct, obvious impact on the individual. Clearly, in the pandemic, soap dispensers have become kind of far more important than kind of maybe that we would have considered before. But actually, that everyday occurrence, that's something that might not be quite so impacting, but actually still is personally kind of difficult, more than an irritation. But I mean, Josh, how about from your perspective in terms of what are the things that you've seen that maybe aren't as high profile but impact you and makes you think about that product design process and whether they thought about you?
I'm fortunate enough to have my first name being Joshua, which is a very common name across the globe, across many different ethnicities. But like some of my other friends I know personally have had to change their names when applying for jobs because of they've realized, and through actual personal attempt, have submitted their CV under 2 different names. One that's more standardly British, and one that's more like, well, not even more like, one that is their African name of origin. And they've realized maybe more often that the British one gets more traction than the actual name. So that's a case of, is that screening software that's actively looking for names that don't fit into a certain category and bypassing them and removing them from the circulation? Or is it like a human thing? Obviously we can't tell because we're on this end, but that's the idea of that practice of doing that to make sure that it isn't software that's automatically just checking them out because they don't fit into a standard mold of British. That's something I personally experienced of having to actually think about. I'm lucky enough, like I said myself, that I don't have to do that for the most part, but the idea that people do have to think about that is something that my friends had to address.
And of course, timely, everyone listening won't know, but we've literally just been talking about use of AI in recruitment as an example. So brilliant and appalling situation that's described there. And I guess then the focus around transparency and being able to kind of understand and ask, well, okay, how is that operating? How is that working?
That's the thing. Yeah, it's a question of, with a whole lot of GDPR, can we find out if that's actually a human doing that, or is it actually an algorithm that's basically been programmed to bypass people? And that's something that definitely needs to be looked into a lot of companies.
And of course, as we know, it's that organisation that's using it that's got that responsibility for it. So in a sense, they can't just kind of look at it as a piece of software that they've bought and it doesn't really kind of understand how it operates. It's that clarity about that, well, they've got the responsibility to ensure it is operating in fair and transparent ways. Great example.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Rob. Obviously, it's a perfect example of, okay, well, who does the responsibility sit with? Is it with the hiring organization that is using this algorithm, or is it with the designers? And I think obviously I'm welcome to answers for my own question, but just to throw some answers and suggestions out there, you've got the responsibility of people creating these algorithms to highlight the limitations of this software, and to perhaps maybe, we can't always get it right from the beginning, but perhaps highlight that, this software does need some development areas where it concerns particular groups of people. And so where there's that conscious effort on people creating these designs, these tools, these systems, these tools to highlight that limitation, then that puts the responsibility on organizations, corporations using this tech to say, well, hey, look, we are aware that this tech has X, Y, and Z limitation. How are we going to try and mitigate that within our own recruitment practices? Does that mean that, we use this algorithm to a certain extent, or this software to a certain extent when recruiting people, but then make exceptions for perhaps where this algorithm or this software might fail, and try to adapt, to make it a bit more of a hybrid approach when it comes to recruitment practices. So that's just a thought and a question just to put out there.
So let's build on that then. So we all operate in a world where we're helping organisations and individuals solve some of these challenges and do things better. So if anyone's listening thinking, I recognise some of those challenges, maybe I'm a product owner, maybe I've got responsibility for a part of a business, and I want to ensure that my services are operating fairly for all. What would maybe the 2 or 3 things that you would recommend that they do differently in thinking about that? Do you want to kind of start with that, Hanna, and then same question to Josh?
Absolutely. So first thing that I'm a big advocate for is having a diverse team, like tool building team. So, you have people that perhaps are from the different communities that influence right from the beginning the structure of or the design of algorithms, that are able to put that input and say, well, are you considering X, Y, and Z group of people? Are you considering? So, just to think of it within a D&I perspective, I think within diversity and inclusion, you always fight for, or you're always an advocate for a cause that you're strongly about. And I feel like in these sort of certain instances, if it's not a problem, you immediately associate yourself with, apologies, it's easily forgotten about, or it's easily, cast to the back of the net until it's too late to sort of implement it. And you're like, okay, well, we're just going to have to run with it. Not to say that organizations do this, but it's very easy just to forget. So having a diverse workforce or task force in the instance is important. I would also say perhaps not making assumptions. And I think when it comes to algorithms and building these things, you always have to make some sort of assumptions, wherever it comes from. Like when you're cleaning the data instantly, you have to make an assumption that, if someone hasn't responded to a question, that means perhaps it was intentional, as opposed to maybe there was a system glitch, for example. And so I think when it comes to dealing with making sure the data is unbiased, you have to be very careful of assumptions and quickly highlight that as a limitation when it comes to the data, and then obviously how that data shapes your output.
And I guess a conscious awareness and documentation of those things as well. So in terms of preserving over time, kind of whatever thought processes and validation have gone into it to ensure that's later available. Josh, what would you build?
To be honest, I would approach it as more of like a developer mindset. So the data set being used when developing, that has to be as diverse as possible. A lot of times with a lot of this AI software, they're basically testing it on Caucasian male, female. And even though like in certain places like UK, that's a large proportion of people, it's not the only like population. So making sure you have data from different demographics that covers the population like percentage and actually reflects the amount of people that could potentially be coming across the software. So I'll start with the data, rigorous testing, another thing. So are you testing against all use cases? So if this software is used against black male, black female, Asian female, non-binary, like that type of thing, like it has to cover all levels of testing, because if it doesn't, then you've not properly tested it. It's not fit for purpose, because if it can come across someone like that in the process and it's not prepared to handle that data, then it doesn't serve its process. So those would be my 2 main big ones. I also piggyback off Hanna in terms of diverse team. A lot of the times it's a people change thing when it comes to these products. In the room when developing, you don't have someone that points out, by the way, have we tested against this? Have we tested against that? So actually having a team that, like Hanna said, someone points out we're missing X, Y, Z, that alongside actual correct data, proper testing, should be able to produce software that doesn't have as much bias as it does. I don't think bias can be completely removed, but the type of bias that we're talking about definitely can be removed.
Okay, cool. And I guess the build on that point around understanding all aspects however it's kind of split,
Yeah.
is differently relevant in kind of different places around the world. So if we're developing software in the middle of China, for example, there might be you've still got to kind of ensure that the breadth of anybody in that environment, or indeed visiting that environment, is considered. It doesn't matter where, the importance is that clarity that those communities, those groups have been tested. What's great? I mean, what is there an organisation out there that you look at and think, wow, actually, I see them as a leader in this field?
From my personal experience, I can't think of any off the top of my head, which is somewhat disheartening. But that also might just be a case of not enough research into it. With this type of topic, you do tend to see the negative before the positive. So I'm happy to go and source out as many positive examples as possible, but as far as I know, I can't name any.
Hanna, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sit with Josh on that, where I wouldn't say I can name specifics of organizations that are out there that have gotten it right or are getting it right. I would just say it's the learning process. When you think of an iOS and an Apple product, it's like there's always a 16.1.0 that's being released every so often, and I just feel like it's the responsibilities of organizations just to make sure when it is highlighted, well, what are you going to do about it? And I think it's the transparency that's there for me, where it's like, you know what, hands up, this is something that we didn't consider in the beginning. Now we are trying to, and they sort of making active efforts. And I think of it, I mean, when you look at facial recognition technology and how we've especially in the UK, we've tried to put that out there when it comes to using it within law enforcement. I think there's now a lot more scrutiny about how we're using that within law enforcement. And there's a lot more effort, just from personally having a look at what's on ground. There's a lot more effort in making sure there's input, from research communities, on what's emerging, what's happening in this space. And it's great that a lot more people are talking about it, and a lot more people from the Black BAME community are actually impacting the research in this space. So, I mean, that's all I can say on it right now. I don't think anyone's gotten it just as right. If there are comments that come through, Rob, on this, and anyone shares things, that'll be lovely to hear about that. But yeah, I think transparency is the first.
I tell you what, I mean, let's ask that question so we can do it after the podcast in terms of on social media. We can see what's the great examples that people are aware of or people are proud of if they're involved in it personally. I guess the challenge with it is it's easy to hear of when it goes drastically wrong than when it actually kind of is known to be right, because how do you as a consumer know when it's right? It's far harder to tell. So just thinking about, again, building on the recommendations of what people can do differently. So we've talked a bit about things that they should consider. What about material that they should read or podcast, ignoring the current podcast, obviously, podcasts or video material, authorities in the field? Is there anyone that you'd highlight that's inspired you or as whether it's academic or in the work that you do today, has been a significant impact in the way you think about things? Hanna?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, the first instance, and this is just me coming across it, I'm by no means any expert. I've just come into this field almost like it fell into my lap. And so I am also trying to find out, okay, well, who can I look up to, who's in this? And before I sort of give my explanation of probably who I do look up to in this space, it's very difficult because, one, we all know within the tech industry, there aren't very many females in the industry, full stop. And then when you look at Black females, there aren't very many Black females in this space either, that perhaps maybe even have enough of a voice to actually make any change or challenge the status quo. So I mentioned her before. So this is Joy Oluwami, and this is just saying it with my British accent, so apologies. And you know, I really do. I think I really am inspired by the work she's done in that facial recognition space, and the fact that it is, whenever anyone talks about facial recognition, she is one of the names that typically comes up, because you know there was a paper written on that. And I will put the name of the paper in this chat, but you know, she, through the work of MIT research, has shed light on some of the gender problems and racial problems within machine learning and their algorithms. Maybe if Josh, you start, and I can probably find the name of her research paper to give to you guys. But I mean, I think there's lots of things out there on racial bias within machine learning, you know, right from looking at the health sector right through to law enforcement, right through to biometrics as well. So, you know, I think if you type in racial bias in algorithms, you will find a lot of work on that. And I think each of these give a different perspective on that.
Cool, thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, so I was gonna like piggyback off what Hannah said in terms of, so from my standpoint, I've not done any particular research into racial bias into algorithms, so like I can't list an author or paper, but I think genuinely from something in preparation for today's podcast, I just Googled bias in algorithms on Google, and the stuff that came up on Google alone, it's just, I think people should just look into that. It's like, it's very telling how quickly it can populate that page. So I feel like people should just educate themselves on the type of things that are out and about now, like just general news articles, page like podcast, publishings on like different web pages, stuff like that. And also there are some podcasts out there, but I can't recite the whole name of them. But it's just the idea of like, just educate yourself as generally as possible, and then from there go into it deeper, because it truly is a case of it's out there a lot more than you think, and it's in a lot more like systematic forms than you think. So definitely just start with Google, go from there, and if you do have any particular people that you have come across, send them my way. I would love to read.
Cool. So I think one of the commitments I was going to make was to kind of find some of those experts globally, and over the next few weeks or months, kind of we'll do maybe a couple more podcasts looking at this subject in a bit more depth, and understand what people are experiencing, and indeed what they're doing differently in organisations to try and address these issues and make a difference. So hopefully we'll come back to that a couple of times over the coming months. I'd just like to say thank you to you both for taking part and engaging in the conversation. Critically important conversation anyway. Obviously kind of very relevant in terms of the CDR principle too, but vitally important for any organisation that's thinking about delivering our products and services using algorithms, using data in appropriate ways. And as we heard earlier, making sure that they clearly understand there's a financial consequence of not getting that right, not just a reputational kind of consequence of it being right. Any final thoughts, Hannah, before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So just wanted to go back on the sort of research papers by Joy. It was the gender shades, intersectional accuracy, disparities in commercial gender classification. So that's where she literally picks out and actually analyzes these algorithms in depth. So she walks you through that, and you get a really good understanding on some of those biases within those algorithms. Cool. That's it from me.
Thank you. And final thoughts, Josh?
No, just thank you for having me. Like, great conversation. I've actually really enjoyed it, so would love to continue the conversation.